Hey everyone, welcome to my Zelda II Adventure of Link series for the NES or Nintendo Entertainment System. In this series, my plans are not to do a playthrough like I have done for my previous series, but rather make a more informative guide because while I have beaten this game before, it is not easy, but don't get discouraged. I will do my best to make a guide that not only guides you through the game, but also helps you understand the mechanics, because when you start this game, it can be quite overwhelming and a little bit confusing. But the first things I would like to go over is how your sword and your shield work. After Ganon was destroyed, Impa told Link a sleeping spell was cast on Princess Zelda. She will wake only with the power of the third Triforce sealed in the palace in Hyrule. To break the seal, crystals must be placed in statues in 6 well-guarded palaces. Link set out on his most adventuresome quest yet. When you first spawn in, you probably noticed that Link, your player, the green guy who's a little bit tall, is 2 little almost blocks tall. They're kind of like certain chunks, but the shield he uses can only cover one of these sections at a time. So if you are just standing there, Link defaults to blocking his upper half, but if you were to press down on the D-pad, he will cover the lower half of his body. Now that we have gone over the shield, we will talk about the sword next. Your sword can only attack towards one of these chunks at a time. So you can only attack the upper half or the bottom half. And before he actually attacks, he has a little wind up, and while he's attacking and winding up, he can take damage. Now that we have gone over the sword and shield, next I would like to explain the 2 bars on the top of your screen. You will notice there are 2 bars up there, one white and the other red. We will talk about the white bar first. This bar represents your magic meter. In this game, you have the ability to learn spells to help aid you on your adventures. Each one of these spells costs a certain amount of magic. When you use one of these spells, it will deduct from your overall bar. Some spells cost more than others do and can become quite pricey. You can also find magic jars throughout the land, which will add a new chunk to your magic bar. This will give you overall more magic that can be used. There is another form of upgrades, but we will look more into that later. Next, we will talk about the red bar. This bar represents your health or life. When you run into enemies or any dangerous objects, your bar will decrease. In this game, you start with 3 lives. Once you deplete your whole health bar, you will lose 1 life. After you lose all 3 lives, it's game over and Ganon returns. One more thing you can do to get more health is finding heart containers. These items will add 1 more chunk to your health bar, like the magic containers. And like magic, we will look more into other upgrades for health later. The next thing we will go over is the leveling up system. First, you need to know where this upgrading system is located on your screen. If you look in the top right of your screen, you should see some numbers. For example, if you just started, it should say 0 out of 50. Now you might be wondering, how do I increase that number? Well, it's quite simple. These numbers basically represent an experience system. You can get experience points, XP, by killing enemies or finding P-bags, point bags. When it comes to enemies, the harder the enemy is to kill, the more XP it gives. So, while low-level enemies may only give 2 or 3 points, more advanced enemies may give up to 50 points. Now back to P-bags, also known as point bags. These are bags that can be found in secret locations or can also be dropped by enemies. They can have 50, 100, 200, or 500 XP points. Now that we know what XP is and how we can get it, you probably want to know what we can do with it. Once you have gained enough XP to fill up the number, like 50 out of 50 XP points, a screen will pop up with 3 upgrades: Attack, Magic, and Life. We will talk about Life first, since it is the cheapest of the 3 upgrades. When you upgrade your life, you will take less damage, so it's more like a defense upgrade. This skill, like all skills, can be upgraded to a max level of 8. Do note that the higher the upgrades are, the more pricey they can be. Next, we will talk about magic. These upgrades are very helpful. Once magic is upgraded, it will reduce the total cost of your magic spells, letting you use more magic spells within your magic bar. Each chunk on your magic bar has 16 points you can spend. Lastly, we have the attack upgrade. These upgrades are the priciest, but very worth it. When you upgrade your attack, you do more damage with your sword. Pretty simple. Here is a chart to show all of the upgrades and their prices. One more thing to note overall when upgrading is, when you reach the XP goal, you have the choice to spend your points on one of the upgrades you can afford, or save them for a more costly upgrade. You can do this by pressing the cancel button. I always pick the next upgrade available to me, but some players say to save and go in on all attack upgrades. Hopefully my explanation was easy to understand, but if you have any questions, I will gladly answer them in the comments. The last thing before we end off this episode I want to talk about is encountering an enemy. Once you leave the palace you spawn in, you will see chunks of different terrain, such as a path, grass, forest, desert, water, and rock. You cannot walk on water and rock chunks though. After walking around for a while, some enemies may spawn in and wander around. There can be small enemies, big enemies, and fairies. Small enemies, if ran into, will open a 2D side-scroller where you have to fight until you reach the end of that screen. The small enemies will open up an easier version of the 2D sections. Big enemies perform similarly, but the enemies you have to fight are a lot harder to beat. Running into a fairy will also open up a 2D side-scroller, but it will have a fairy you can run and jump into to help replenish your life. Now that you know what those wandering things are, you might be curious why we talked about the terrain. Depending on what type of terrain you run into the enemies on, it will determine what you have to fight. Grass and desert have some challenge, but are relatively easy, although I would try to avoid encountering enemies in the forest if possible, because those sections are trickier to beat. But if you are to encounter anything on one of the path tiles, nothing will spawn, just a blank screen you get to walk through. So, things to remember: stay away from the big enemies. If you have to run into an enemy, go for a small one and watch out for forest tiles. Fairies are there to help you, run into them if possible. And last, stay on the path when it's available. That's gonna wrap it up for the first episode. We went over some basic mechanics and hopefully it all made sense. I hope everyone enjoyed, and if you like my content, please consider liking, subscribing, or commenting. They're all greatly appreciated. And just a heads up, this video probably came out a little bit later than usual, but my uploads might become a little bit more spaced out because school's coming up. And I will be continuing the Link's Awakening series, but I wanted to get this video out first. Thanks for watching, and bye.